Winter is an expensive time of year. Even if you don't celebrate Christmas, the bribes to Game North for the game you want to go on sale end up costing more than the game at full price anyway. Plus, bills are more expensive, there are a bunch of charity events going on during December, and every single company is throwing new products at you. I have no self-control. So on top of all of this, the last thing you want is to have to sacrifice one of your hobbies because of it being too expensive. Thankfully, gaming really doesn't have to break the bank. It can either be one of the most expensive hobbies, or one of the least. It all depends on how you approach it. Personally, I have never really enjoyed spending a big chunk of money every month on whatever the new big thing is. Yeah, I'll definitely pick up a new game on release every once in a while, if it's something that I've really been looking forward to for a long time, and then not get around to playing it for years. But I have found so much enjoyment out of games that cost me about a fifth of the price of this. In my eyes, one of the absolute best ways of gaming on a budget is through big sales events. Most platforms will have these sales, but one of the most prolific and my personal favourite is Steam. Steam has always been a great platform for finding good deals. Every time I boot it up, I get shown some random games that are discounted. But the real crowning jewel is in its annual summer and winter sales events. There are so many great games to grab here for at worst 10 or 20% off, and at best you can get things like the Handsome Jack collection for about 95% off. These tend to be where I buy most of my games. Unless it's something I really want, it can wait until the Steam sales. Buying games during these events can honestly save you a pretty ridiculous amount of money. The only problem with them being that most of the best deals are on games that have either been out for a while or didn't really sell too well on release. But honestly, from Borderlands 2 to the Portal games to the plethora of indie games, there is so much to choose from. It's also a pretty good idea to keep an eye out for little Steam bundles. Sometimes you'll find a game that you like that is bundled in with some relatively similar games. If it looks like something that you're into, then you can get a pretty decent deal here. Other than the big ones in summer and winter, you can also keep a lookout throughout the year. Sometimes there'll be shorter sales at different points in the year, like a week in October for example this year. One of the best ways to save money when buying games is to not buy them at all, or at least trying to buy them less often. The best way of doing this is making sure that the games you are playing have some sort of replay value to them. I'd rather jump off a moving train than have to boot up Cannonball again just to be matched with a friggin' bot. Some games have near infinite replay value. Minecraft has random world generation, making every new time playing it feel completely different from the last, and the only real limit is your imagination when it comes to what you can make. Super Smash Bros. Is a game you can sink basically hundreds of hours into without it getting old so long as you have other people to play it with. The sheer amount of characters to play as, each taking a shit ton of dedication to master, and the outplay potential makes it stupidly replayable. Some games like Borderlands 2 have so much to do that it will take a pretty damn long time to 100% it, plus if you do manage to completely finish it, all of its side quests, and the DLC, you have the option to play it again 2 more times on harder difficulties. One of my favourites to boot up is something like Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Now that the DLC courses are starting to build up, we have a pretty huge amount of tracks to pick from. I personally am not a big fan of any of the tour tracks. I think they stick out like a sore thumb among basically all of the other game's tracks, and it's pretty obvious that they were designed for mobile. But aside from that, it's honestly one of Nintendo's most replayable games. By the time that you've played through all of the cups, you'll be ready to start back over without getting bored. And man, it's so funny to play with a group of friends. It's also one of the many games that can give you so much more hours of fun if you're into speedrunning. Trying to get every single input to be as perfect as possible, just to shave off a tenth of a second in the hopes of getting a new personal best time, just adds this breath of fresh air back into the game. Most games actually have some sort of speedrunning or challenge community, which can honestly double a game's lifespan. As much as I love the Portal games, I probably wouldn't want to play them over and over again, because sadly puzzle games can suffer from only having 1 or 2 playthroughs in them before it gets old and you eventually just remember what to do in half the rooms. But damn, the speedrunning community for this game is on another level entirely. There are also a bunch of challenges that you can do to spice up a game a little more. See how few times you can press the A button in Mario, or how long you can play Overwatch for without having an existential crisis. Second-hand games are phenomenal for getting a bunch of games for much cheaper than you'd usually be able to. The best place to go for these sort of things tends to be eBay, or even going to a car boot sale or something and finding some old lady selling Pokemon Emerald for 50p. So long as they aren't damaged, second-hand games can be amazing value. Many games just aren't on platforms that'll throw them on sale a few times a year, and your only option is to get a physical copy. This means that they can sometimes get kinda hard to come by, and second-hand shops will definitely up the price a bit because of this. But just take a look online, and there are always people who aren't selling their old games to make a profit, but instead just want them gone. This usually means that you can get like 80 games for a tenner if you're lucky, And if the gods have really shined down on you, then there might be some rare or otherwise expensive games included. A lot of the time, it'll be random crap with a few good games thrown in, but even then, it's worth getting the games that you'll never play, so long as there are a few good finds in there. I mentioned before that it's charity season at the moment, so it's pretty easy to find a bunch of charity bundles. Humble Bundle is the first one that comes to my mind, where so long as you pay a fairly low minimum price, you can get a ridiculous amount of value for some genuinely great games. Of course, the only problem with these bundles is that you don't get a huge amount of choice of what comes within the bundle. In many cases, there might be a couple of games that you really want, and then just a load of random junk that doesn't really appeal to you, but even then, it still usually ends up being worth it. The great thing about this is that in a lot of bundles, you know you're helping sending money to charity. So that bird that flew into the windscreen of your car last week? Guilt nullified. Honestly, if you're a big fan of AAA games, or generally have more expensive taste in video games, it's really worth looking here because while there aren't often too many indie games, there are usually quite a few games that'll add up to a couple of hundred. Now, alternatively, indie games tend to be a different playing field altogether. Even at full price, an indie game will usually never be much over £15, and this isn't to say that there is less to be enjoyed by any means, just usually there are less people to pay, and the creators aren't usually as focused on making billions. Stardew Valley is a game that has a pretty huge amount of content, and even a slight bit of replayability in making a new world, romancing a new person, and even going down the JoJo route. Celeste definitely isn't too replayable, at least not without some time in between playthroughs, but damn, there is still a lot to do from the general story, to the B and C sides, to the Golden Strawberry challenges, to even just finding some of the hidden secrets. But even both of these pale in comparison to one of the most replayable genres in all of indie games, the roguelikes. Risk of Rain 2 is a game that I honestly never get tired of booting up. The item combos and general feel of the game are f***ing incredible. The Binding of Isaac has a ridiculous amount of content and achievements to unlock, along with being a pretty difficult game to get great at, and Enter the Gungeon is a bullet hell roguelike every indie player dreams of. So while bundles have AAA titles covered, if you're a fan of the indies, they usually stand pretty well on their own, especially if you find a couple on sale. Lastly, check some forums. While Reddit can be a bit of a wild place, there are genuinely some really helpful subreddits for even the most niche topic. And since gaming is anything but niche now, and we all enjoy a good deal, there are of course a bunch of subreddits specifically for posting games that go on sale, including all relevant information like what the game is, where to find it, what platform it's on, and how much it is. One of the most popular ones I could find is r/game deals, and while they're probably much more spammed with deals during the colder months, these places look to be active all year round. So overall, there are a bunch of great ways to enjoy games while on a budget, but something that I think is quite important to note is that you definitely shouldn't always go for whatever the cheapest game is, or even what you think is the most cost effective. You will end up with an absolutely atrocious games library like that. A shorter game that you enjoy can last for much longer than a long game that you don't really care about, because you either won't enjoy much of the time you spend in it and have to force yourself to get through it, or you will end up just not bothering to play at all. So there is always a middle ground, but as a rule of thumb, you will always get more enjoyment, and often playtime, out of a game that you truly love than a game that you only bought for its price. That being said, keep a lookout for deals, bundles and second-hand games, and see how much you can get for a smaller budget this holiday season.